All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for April's third Thursday. My name is Hillary Hochstein. I do marketing communications and member support. Looks like we've got a few people still jumping in the session here. So we'll just start with a brief overview of the CCBA and then I'll introduce today's speakers. So the Canadian Craft Brewers Association exists for three reasons. We lobby the federal government for the interests of craft beer. We run member programs such as this one, and we promote Canadian craft beer both nationally and internationally. We're made up as a federation of all the provincial associations, and we work to represent the interests of all independent Canadian craft breweries across the country. Today, I am joining from Thunder Bay, which I would like to acknowledge is traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation and signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. We also acknowledge the contributions that the Métis people have had in this community. I would encourage you to take this opportunity to either now or following the webinar, make sure that you know the traditional territory that you are joining from today and acknowledge the privilege that affords you to be able to live and work on that traditional territory. So today we have an incredible team of HR experts from Gallagher joining us today. Gallagher has come on as one of the CCBA's lead sponsors, and we are really excited to have them on board. We've got Dean, Farzeen, and Dolly sharing with us today, and they'll be bringing their expertise in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would encourage you to check out their supplier showcase profile on our website. I'll put that in the chat, and see if some of their services might be a good fit for your brewery. They've really shown to be a great supporter of our industry through their sponsorship. And we do encourage our member breweries where applicable to be sure that you see if their services might be a good fit for you. They do group benefits, they do HR consulting and other types of consulting, as well as risk management. And without any further ado, I will hand things over to Emily Cowan. She is the chair of our Inclusion and Anti-Discrimination Committee, and she'll give a bit of an overview of the status of what the committee is working on.
Thank you, Hillary. So my name is Emily. I am in Nova Scotia, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, known as Mi'kmaqi. I have recently been given the great privilege of chairing this Inclusion and Anti-Discrimination Committee as we transition through digesting the results of the benchmarking survey that we did last year. Many of you may have participated in that. And this week, we're very pleased to be sharing the results of that survey more widely. We did host a meeting of our members last week where we presented our key takeaways and some of those survey results. I believe as of today, that recording is now available for others to access, as well as a document that summarizes our key takeaways. I just want to acknowledge the other members of this committee. I'm joined by a number of other brewery owners. I am also a brewery owner and a member of the board of the CCBA. And then we also have some provincial association heads and some of the staff of the CCBA on this committee. We all serve on this committee as volunteers. We are doing the best that we can so far with some limited resources, and we're really committed to doing this work and trying to get some momentum for the change that we can all see that needs to happen in our industry. So I hope that you will all take the time to, if you weren't at the meeting last week, to watch the recording of the presentation of the survey results, to have a look at our key takeaways document. And I think I'll come back after Gallagher is finished and talk a little bit more about what's happening next in terms of our committee. But our overall goals really for the industry are to increase representation of marginalized groups, to reduce incidents of discrimination and experiences of discrimination within the industry, and really work towards creating spaces that are safe and inclusive for everyone. We hope to do that through providing some resources and some education, but also through some activities that will really help us build that culture within the industry. I think we have craft beer in general, I think, has a huge opportunity to be a leader in this area because craft beer can be a catalyst for so many great conversations, and I think for change in general. So I look forward to working with all of you on that. And I think the CCBA has a really unique role in acting as a host for some of those conversations as we navigate this change. So I would just like to extend the invitation to continue to be part of that. And thank you all for coming today to hear what the team from Gallagher has to present to us. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dean and Farzeen and Dolly from Gallagher, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say today.
Oh, Emily, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dean Schroeder, Senior HR Practice Leader with Gallagher Benefit Services here in Calgary, coming to you from the traditional land of the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Treaty 7 territory, which includes the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda. Calgary is also home to the Métis people of Region 3. And finally, we acknowledge all nations, Indigenous and non, who live, work, and play on this land and who honor and celebrate this territory.
Hi there, I'm Dolly Hussy, Client HR Associate from Gallagher, also connecting from Calgary.
Hi everyone, I'm Farzeen Mawji, National Practice Leader for Inclusion and Diversity. I'm coming to you from Edmonton today, actually, and acknowledge the traditional land on which we reside on is on Treaty 6 territory, a land whose ancestors include many diverse Indigenous people, including the Métis, and also one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel.
Let's connect the dots between leadership awareness surrounding diversity, inclusion, belonging, and building a respectful workplace.
Thanks, Dolly. What a journey we've all been on. Now, I've led teams that I was determined to really impress upon my employees that the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of each of them was important and really worth developing. It was, and it still is, about building resilience and understanding and what it means to be inclusive and how that ultimately presents itself at work. You know, people are often motivated to change, especially when they see profound differences in those around them. But these changes typically don't usually last, setting the organizational culture back. And it's often that 2 steps forward, 10 steps back analogy, and really causing frustrations throughout the organization. But folks, we need societal change too. You know, what the CCBA is currently doing with its reoccurring survey, they're great first steps. And actually having these discussions will help to leverage our power and influence to change the policies, the structures, and cultural norms that perpetuate so much inequity.
So here's something to think about now, as well as taking away and working on later. Our working world has changed as a result of the pandemic. It's very different. Our businesses are different, and we know and see that many people themselves are different as a result of our experiences during the crisis. So as we all emerge from the shadow of this crisis, we have a golden opportunity to reimagine every single aspect of how we work, how we learn, how we treat one another, and how we take time for ourselves. And we should all try and seize it with both hands.
Oh man, and seize it we will. We're going to reference throughout kind of the presentation today some of the responses that came out of that CCBA Diversity and Inclusion Report. Now, as you know, that the industry-wide diversity survey was conducted to really meet the objectives of understanding the state of diversity, inclusivity, and equity within the craft beer industry. But it also creates a baseline in determining further action of the Inclusive and Anti-Discrimination Committee that we just heard of this morning. Interestingly, it was found that overwhelmingly high scores indicate lack of awareness of industry diversity and inclusiveness shortcomings and biases. And responses indicate that breweries need resources and training. And often we find with these types of surveys, folks, that another consistent objective that comes up is the indirect relationship with leadership capabilities. Now today, let's talk openly about how we really feel and the challenges we're facing. As individuals, as colleagues and employees, the more we learn and share knowledge, the more we can start to affect real change. You know, the past few months, in light of kind of what's been going on currently, reminded me of the importance of consistently checking in. Now, we all know you've dealt with the ever-changing landscape. Are we open? Are we closed? How many customers are allowed in? What time does service end? Who can work? As an HR leader, communication is a core competency. And I have been coaching leaders through this time in a lot of industries to over-communicate. If you think it feels like it's too much, guess what? It isn't. You need to stretch yourself, push through your comfort zone, and continually check in. So in looking at what we've been discussing today, specifically that's on the slide, what's respect in the work environment? What is diversity, inclusion, and belonging? And how can we foster an environment that supports it? What role does leadership and empathy play in all of this? Farz, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. As we think about leadership, we have to look at inclusive leadership. And that's leadership that values and celebrates our own diversity, as well as the diversity of the folks around us. So through meaningful actions like empathy and curiosity, humility and understanding, we create and nurture environments that are inclusive, and they cultivate that feeling of belonging and that value for all those that are within them. So today we'll discuss some of the fundamentals of diversity and inclusion, and also how belonging, how that relates to diversity and inclusion, and share some examples of how the fundamentals work together and how we can take actions to practice and engage in authentic behaviors that are going to resonate with those around us. So we'll take some time to show how you as leaders can actually cultivate all of this.
I was recently interviewed by a large university in Canada about where my opinions and thoughts, where I thought HR was heading. And I thought I'd kind of share a little bit of that response to a couple of questions asked to me that I think are pretty relevant to kind of what we're going to speak to today. I really truly believe that in the next 5 years, those in HR positions, or those that are handling HR things, like many of you, will collaborate and work really more strategically with the business as a whole. There'll be more buy-in with leaders and employees. We all know the old traditional command and control style of leadership. Well, let's move forward. This old school type of leadership is a thing of the past. But what's replaced it? There isn't one leadership sweet spot that really fits our fast-moving, curveball throwing times. Leadership, folks, is hard. You simply can't have 6 priorities going on at one time without dropping the ball or ultimately confusing your employees. You need to focus on one priority at a time for your employees. What's going to get in the way? Is everything aligned? So in my view, HR is really about finding, attracting, and helping to grow the best people and ultimately shaping the culture and diversity, inclusion, and belonging, which is a huge component of this. I think many companies make the mistake of thinking that HR or whoever is handling HR things really kind of owns the culture. My personal belief is that you as leaders and owners, and that the team within owns the culture, and HR's role, or my role, is to really help the team shape that culture. HR facilitates those activities that lead to the culture that the company really aspires to.
Thanks, Dean. And that's such a great way of framing the role of HR within organizational cultures. So let's talk about leadership now. So often leaders take on leadership roles without actually having all the training and the experience that they need to actually lead rather than manage. So there are key attributes of effective leaders that can be learned and they can be built upon. But now when leaders don't take the time to learn and practice those attributes, there can be a high emotional cost that can impact their mental health as well as the mental health of those that they lead. Now, we've heard the terms of emotional intelligence and empathy, and they're used quite frequently these days. In some cases, they're words on a wall, or maybe even a catchy mission statement. But oftentimes, those principles of emotional intelligence and empathy, they're not fully understood. So let's unpack what they mean today and how they can be applied so we can all grow as leaders. Empathy is one aspect of emotional intelligence, and it's the favorite one for me. It comprises the ability to share it and also understand what others are going through.
So far as an example, let's say I was to ask you how you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that would be great. So say you asked me how I'm doing today, and I responded by saying, you know what, Dean, I'm okay, but I've got some stuff going on personally that's really weighing on me right now. And I'm not feeling 100%. Now, you can respond in one of two ways. First way, let's say you respond by saying, oh yeah, okay, well, that sounds hard, but hey, you're at work now, so let's forge ahead and focus on what needs to get done. Now, that's not going to leave me feeling like I was empathized with. It's actually going to make me feel like I was ignored. And it's quite likely that the next time you ask me how I'm doing, I'm just going to leave it with a simple I'm fine, and I'll look somewhere else for my empathy. So what if you switch that around though? What if you responded by saying something like, gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that, Fars. How can I support you? How can I help? If you'd like, we could take a few minutes to talk about this right now. In doing that, you're pausing what you're doing. You're inviting me to share what I'm going through, and you're showing me that you actually care about me, that you're open and curious to learning about what I'm going through. And you've left me with that feeling that I have an ally I can turn to for support. And as a result of that conversation, I'm much more likely to feel that I can bring my whole self to work. And that energy that I would have expended hiding my challenges, well, now that's freed up. I get to use that energy to feel better and be more engaged when I'm at work. So hopefully we can all see the differences there in those two responses and how empathy can really make a big impact. Unfortunately, though, empathy has been eroding over the past few decades, and maybe we can all kind of relate to this, especially during the pandemic. Studies are showing us that people have slowly been abandoning empathy when it becomes too hard. Maybe we've got enough of our own plates, and we feel like being empathetic towards others is only going to add to our own challenges. I'll let you in on a little secret, though. The truth is, when we're empathetic towards others, we often gain allies who are empathetic towards us. And so we then get to share the load of our own challenges too. That's the secret there. It's like when you give a little, you get a little too. Another way that empathy has been eroding is when we're faced with somebody who disagrees with us. Now, we've all been there when somebody has a different perspective or they disagree, and we just tune them out, or we pass judgment, or we just dismiss them. We may write them off as being wrong or misguided even, and then we don't take the time to understand why they think or feel differently than we do. When we take that dismissive approach, we're also dismissing any opportunities for creativity and innovation that could have been gained from listening to a different perspective than ours and potentially seeing things in a new way.
Fars, it's such great information and insight on that, and particularly on the empathetic mindset. But really, how do you build empathy within this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, I will tell you there's some good news there. We can build empathy. So it was a long thought of as a trait that was hardwired into our brains. So, scientists were telling us that we either had empathy or we didn't. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, new studies have validated that empathy is actually a skill and it can be learned and grown. So it moves along the spectrum, which means it's influenced by events in our lives that can either grow it or diminish it. So for example, when we're feeling empathized with, we're much more likely to empathize with others because some of the burdens that we've been carrying on our own have now been shared, and that frees up that energy. Likewise, when we don't feel empathized with, we're much more likely to ignore or dismiss others that are in need of empathy. So Dean, you asked me, how can you build empathy? First, you have to find a reason to practice engaging and building empathy for yourself. So let's think about some questions here. Do you want to connect more meaningfully with others? Do you want to broaden your perspective and understanding of the world? Mm-hmm. How about learning from the lived experience of others and using that knowledge to spark your own creativity, your own innovation, and your own problem solving? My guess is that a lot of you answered yes. And so if so, those are your reasons to build empathy. Now, it doesn't have to feel like hard work. And trust me when I tell you that there are far more benefits to being empathetic that people who are empathetic enjoy over their non-empathetic peers. So for example, empathetic people, they're proven to be happier and they attract friends more easily. They excel at work, especially when that work involves people. And we know all of the work that we do are very people-centric. Employees of empathetic leaders also report feeling less stressed. Again, we're freeing up that energy to be more productive and engaged. So once you've found a reason to practice engaging and building empathy, you have to make conscious choices to be empathetic towards others. Now here's the challenge. You have to empathize with purpose, especially when it's hard, right? So the next time you encounter someone that disagrees with you, take a moment for yourself and then proceed with humility and curiosity to learn why they disagree with you. Ask them to share their perspective with you, and then truly listen with an open mind to what they have to tell you. Another example is when you're walking down the street and you come across a person who's homeless. Instead of ignoring them or maybe even crossing the street to avoid them, pay attention to their face. Take a moment to make eye contact and offer them a smile that lets them know that you see them and that you actually acknowledge them. When you practice engaging over and over again, you build that empathy that's deeper and that's broader and much more muscular. So that's the way in which you can actually make this a part of your daily interactions and build it as a skill set for yourself. Now, Dolly, I think back to the survey, there was some other information that came out of the survey.
Definitely. Thanks, Fars. So shifting gears here a little bit, yeah, we will jump back to the survey. And when we look at some of the comments that came in from respondents, a number of themes emerged from those comments. And again, these are people's perceptions. So some of the qualitative themes that were compiled in the survey are it's perception that people are not walking the talk, that there's some current concerns with leadership actions, and there's some concerns with how the current structure may hinder individual voices. There's also concerns that the diversity, equity, inclusion lens is missing from some of the current processes. There's a perception that there's a lack of diverse representation within companies, and also that there's a lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in policies and procedures. So if we even take a higher level look at those comments themselves, you can really see that they're essentially tied to leadership concerns and concerns around diversity and inclusion, exactly what we're all talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Dolly. So let's think about some of those themes from the survey and how they relate to leadership through the lens of emotional intelligence. So another aspect of emotional intelligence that's essential for inclusive leadership is being aware of our own unconscious biases. Now, when we're talking about unconscious biases, these are biases that are ingrained within who we are, and they're formed by what we've learned or absorbed through our own life experiences. So for example, perhaps you've grown up in the same city you were born in, and you've never really traveled to other parts of the world that have different cultures than your own. When that happens, you may have a bias in favor of your own culture, or perhaps those that look like you. Now, this may show up unconsciously for you, and it's not until you look around who your friends are, or maybe who you choose to work with, or even hire, that you start to realize that maybe your circle of influence is looking a little homogenous. So we've got a video that we're going to try and show you here, and it's a really short video, but it articulates very quickly how these biases show up in these really, immediate unconscious ways. So Dolly, do you want to try playing that video for us?
Yeah, fingers crossed. It worked in the test run.
Survival. Our brain is hardwired to trust what's familiar and be suspicious of what's unfamiliar. It's a basic survival instinct that's helped keep us safe for thousands of years.
We unconsciously sort things into familiar versus unfamiliar, same versus different, them versus us. Here's a test. How do you feel about people who own a handgun,
don't attend church,
Vote for the other candidate,
are on welfare,
don't eat meat,
have tattoos,
don't believe in marriage,
drive an electric car,
didn't go to college,
don't speak English,
curse,
are over 60,
are disabled,
drive the speed limit,
love cats,
love dogs? Can you feel your brain sorting people into groups? Was there a little them versus us happening? It can happen unconsciously.
There you go.
Oh,
Hopefully
sorry,
that
give
can
me one
retweet
moment
something
here.
to you. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. So what that video shows us is that we're not alone in this. Everyone has unconscious biases, and there's no getting away from that. However, the more we know about our own biases, the better able we are to navigate around them. Now, as leaders, it's especially important for us to know who we are first, and then learn about those that we surround ourselves with. Two ways in which we can start that journey of learning is to understand what intersectionality is and how it shapes our lived experience. Now, when we think about intersectionality, this might be a new term for some of you. What we're talking about there are really the unique aspects that intersect and overlap that create our unique individual identities. So for example, this can include things like gender or sex, race, religion, physical appearance, and so much more. So let me share with you my example of intersectionality. So I was born in East Africa, and we moved to Canada when I was 6 years old. I identify as a man, and I follow the faith of Islam. Parts of my intersectionality, therefore, include being an immigrant, a Muslim, a Canadian man with roots in East Africa. Now that intersectionality, that informs and shapes the way in which we interact with the world around us. This creates our lived experience. Now, a person's lived experience is gained through direct firsthand involvement. So going back to the example there, my lived experience of coming to Canada as a young boy, experiencing snow for the first time because my family moved us here in the middle of March. And so I finally saw what this strange phenomenon was of snow. I was also the only person in my class that had darker skin. You know, in my first grade class, I was the only one with dark skin. And I grew up speaking English and I felt like a Canadian while also being drawn to learn more about East Africa. And, you know, a few years back when we traveled back to East Africa, I had this innate connection to the East African people that I couldn't explain. Those are all parts of my lived experience.
So far as by sharing our own intersectionality, how does that apply as a leader and to our own biases?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a leader, I tend to share my own intersectionality and lived experience, and I invite those I work with to do the same, if they're comfortable doing so. So as we learn more about each other and we share all parts of ourselves, not just the professional aspects, we create a meaningful connection with one another. And that allows us to collaborate in a more authentic way, and it shares our ideas and be more open with each other's perspectives in a more receptive way. Now, understanding intersectionality and lived experience helps us become better allies for one another as well. An ally is someone who supports and celebrates someone else's identity. The key word there is celebrates, not just tolerates or accepts, but really celebrates it. And they interrupt or challenge the offensive remarks and actions of others. Allies are also really willing to explore biases within themselves and take actions to mitigate those biases. So it's important to remember here that allyship is a verb. That means it requires action. Some of that action includes learning about one another and doing our best not to be judgmental of intersectionality and lived experiences that are different than our own. It means using appropriate language and speaking up when someone says or does something that's inappropriate. So for example, maybe you're with a group of friends and somebody makes an inappropriate joke. It's important to let that person know that what they're saying is offensive. Now, I know this can feel a little intimidating at times because you may not want to call somebody out and create that tension. So what I'll suggest to you is call them in rather than calling them out. When you call someone in, you can pull them aside and just say, you know what, I'd like to share some feedback with you. When you do that, you're not being confrontational. In return, the person you're calling in is less likely to go on the defensive. They're more likely to hear what you have to say and use it as a learning opportunity for themselves to do a little bit better the next time. Finally, let's talk about inclusive language. Our words have so much more power than we're aware of sometimes, and it's important to be thoughtful about the words that we choose. Now, inclusive language is another essential aspect of being emotionally intelligent and an inclusive leader. This can show up in how you greet colleagues. So for example, saying hi friends or hi team, rather than hi guys, when you're addressing a group of people that includes gender diversity. In job postings, maybe you choose to be inclusive by saying they will perform the following duties, rather than he or she will perform the following duties. The key here is to be respectful and acknowledge that each of us have an authentic way of being inclusive with each other. So Dolly, I know we had some information in the survey that came out based on this area. Maybe you can share what the respondents said.
For sure. Thanks, Fars. Again, when we're looking at some of the survey data from the leadership perspective, there were candid qualitative themes that came out. And again, these are people's perceptions. So many of the respondents believe that their leaders' actions are not consistent with the communication. Again, the perception that people are not walking the talk is mentioned in the other comment section. Respondents also indicated that management does not necessarily demonstrate diversity, equity, and inclusion through their actions, and providing support for what Dean has talked about, the cognizant or the understanding of our own bias and why these scores have come out low in the survey report. Typically, bias exists if there's no transparency, and it often offers validation as to why the respondents believe, again, that there's a low understanding of bias among the leaders of their respective breweries. So also, if there's a lack of procedural transparency, people just tend to assume that the process is biased, even if it isn't. And taking a look at the slide here, again, a number of the dominant themes that came out is that there's a perception that the brewing industry is white and male dominated, that it's more of a boys' club, that it's difficult to find diverse talent, possibly because there's a lack of diverse applicants, And also there is some diversity, but that tends to be in the front of house where it is shown. And generally the back of house or behind the scenes is still seen as primarily white. So it's hard for people who have a desire to change if they're not aware of the need to change in the first place. And then it's hard for someone to know how and what to change if they don't have a desire to seek this knowledge. So over to you, Dean, to delve into this a little more.
Well, as we kind of mentioned from the start, the data reveals that there's consistency between the relatively low scores for transparency and the cognizance of bias, and that there is a disconnect, not surprisingly, between the leaders' actions and their communication. And management does not demonstrate diversity, equity, and inclusion through those actions. And all of this provides support for why they assume that the cognizance of bias is low. And so, as we stated earlier, it's not surprising to us that more often than not, around these types of surveys, another consistent objective that comes up is the indirect relationship with leadership capabilities. So it's all connected. And I also think it's really important to mention, I think it was on page 30 of that report, respondents noted, although many members do feel welcomed and valued in their environment, many feel it's difficult to voice concerns. It's really important, folks, that you create an environment where people can tell you the truth. Doing hard things isn't easy, and quite frankly, being a leader is not easy. We do hear this from time and time again, and I often coach people on this. Often the people on a leader's team don't feel comfortable speaking up about how their leaders could maybe be more effective. There's all this stuff that kind of remains unsaid. It's like any other relationship where if you let things fester, then it blows up. And so in the past, I've always asked leaders, are you creating space for people to tell you how they feel? Because the higher you go, we need to ensure that we as leaders are kind of inspiring with vision and passion, and that we're expanding impact with our employees, all the while making sure that we're driving growth. And we're also unlocking people's full potential and displaying resilience, humanity, and humility. This is what will motivate your employees, I would say, to give their best effort every day, creating more sustainable engagement per se.
Dean, I love those principles. Perhaps you can tell us from a leadership perspective, what's really needed to keep employees motivated?
Oh, great point, Fars. Thanks. From a motivation perspective, employees need, I think, a few fundamental things. They need flexibility to satisfy their need to feel like they have a degree of control over how they balance work, achieve their goals, seeing options available to them. They also need clarity to provide a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, and really demystify how they'll be rewarded, especially in this new kind of hybrid context that some of us are working in. They also need equity and a sense of fairness, and that they all will be treated with the same degree of respect and transparency, which then provides connection with other employees to develop camaraderie, but also with the organization and leadership so that there builds a sense of belonging. And then finally, another principle is opportunity. Opportunity for individuals who want to continue to grow, progress in their careers, and build their reputations in areas of the interest. Employees right now may not know what they want, but in all likelihood, they're more aware of their needs. This may be they could be asking probably new questions from when the survey was launched, like, am I valued? Do I see a future for myself here? Is this work energizing for me? Us as leaders cannot simply fill in the blanks. The more that we know about what the employee wants, then we as leaders can start to win back that remaining percentage of employees one at a time, and still while retaining the rest. I think it's really a corporate moment of truth right now. And if our core values are inspirational or aspirational, it really then focuses on the employee experiences, and it kind of ties everything back to those values. I often talk a lot about authenticity in leadership and how that really is, folks, a key to building strong relationships and inspiring team members to give their maximum effort. What's the difference between your intention or how you come across and then the impact? You know, success is rarely ever built on one moment of genius, although I think a lot of us like to think it is, but it's often built on a shameless refusal to quit and sheer stubbornness. That's true in so many things, and leadership certainly included in all of that. However, every professional leader has faced challenges on their journey. They're unavoidable and can cause really feelings of doubt, fear, frustration, and a sense of defeat. The flip side of this relentless drive is that tunnel vision and missing kind of all the peripheral stuff, such as how are your employees really feeling? So far as I'm going to throw it back to you, we often hear the struggles and thoughts and questions. And actually, I had a client yesterday that brought this question up. You know, has your team given up as you steamroll ahead as a leader? And as a leader, how inclusive is your work environment? And really, ultimately, do your employees belong?
Yeah, those are good questions. And you're right, Dean. We hear them quite often. Now, remember, folks, diversity is a fact. Inclusion is a choice. So you likely have a lot of diversity in your circles of influence. Whether that diversity is visible or invisible, I assure you it's there. So when you actively choose to help folks feel included, you gain the value of their diversity because they're invited to bring their whole selves to your interactions with them. Now, it's a common missed opportunity for organizations to just focus on diversity without taking that necessary next step of creating inclusion. So you can have a collection of a lot of different people, but if those people don't feel included, you're not going to benefit from the power of their diversity and really be able to leverage the creativity, the innovation, the engagement, and the productivity that comes from folks that feel included and valued. So let's take a moment here. Take a moment to think about what it feels like to be included. Okay, now think about how did you feel when you were not included? We all know the difference in those feelings, right? And how it's impacted the ways in which we have behaved as a result. And usually these feelings are internalized and they impact our behaviors for a long time afterwards. Everyone can think of that moment when they feel like they didn't belong. It's not a feeling you forget. You know, even as a kid, you develop a spidey sense for it. The truth is exclusion hurts, and thinking of times when you didn't fit in because of something you couldn't even control can teleport you right back into that sort of sad pit in your stomach kind of feeling. Now, have you ever wondered if the colleagues who sit around you feel like they have to filter major parts of their personal identity out of their professional persona? Do they check a part of their life at the door each day? If so, how painful must it be to tolerate that sense of exclusion every day just to make a living? And it sounds ridiculous, I know, but it happens every single day. We all have to actively work towards helping folks feel included, as well as bring our own whole selves to work so that everyone is invited to feel that they actually belong.
Oh, Fars, I think that you bring up such a huge point in the fact that people are checking part of their life at the door when they kind of go into work. So thanks for bringing that up. And, you know, as a leader, we need to make sure people feel that they belong, create buy-in, create inclusivity, create followers. It really follows your mission and your values, your own and the ones you'd like your employees to have or adopt, and really at the end of the day, admitting mistakes. You know, diversity and inclusion and all the talk that's kind of going on about it consistently still matter. But all of it won't cut it if you don't consider belonging as part of the equation. You know, belonging is the crucial piece of the puzzle. It leads to psychological safety, it leads to employee engagement, it leads to retention. Supportive environments even trigger different responses in the brain, leading to a better collaboration and problem solving. You know, appreciation is essential to employees as oxygen. Without it, systems fail. People need to know their leaders and peers notice and that they're grateful for their efforts, especially if they're doing above and beyond work. You know, as we stated earlier on, Belonging creates that trust that's really needed for people to share their best thinking. Our view is that by creating a sense of belonging at work, there's an outcome of 3 mutually reinforcing attributes. Number 1, so in other words, employees should feel comfortable at work, including being treated fairly and respected by their colleagues, and that includes sharing personal stories. 2, they should feel connected to the people they work with and the teams they're a part of. Is it a safe environment? Is there trust? And number 3, they should feel that they contribute to a meaningful work outcome, understanding maybe how their unique strengths are helping their teams and their organizations achieve common goals. So again, kind of looking at that CCBA survey data, understanding of biases were the lowest set of scores in the survey. So this really suggests to us that the respondents feel that for the most part, leadership is unaware of how their behaviors are perceived by others. You know, we've said it time and time again, folks, engagement levels matter. The higher they get, the more energized employees are about their work and the more enthusiastic they are about their employer. This relationship also influences opportunities and outcomes for the organization well within that diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. So Dolly, I know there were some other comments that were mentioned in the survey as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. And as we mentioned earlier, again, there's a number of respondents and so many similarities between these different comments. But again, it just is reinforcing the themes that are coming out throughout the survey, which is great. So the data collected from the senior managers did indicate that most breweries don't have the systems and structures in place to facilitate a diverse and inclusive work environment. There is comments from the respondents saying they want to use craft beer's visibility in local communities, as Emily mentioned earlier on, as a catalyst for achieving inclusivity and diversity in our communities. They're providing feedback to leadership in a safe environment is one of the hardest safety things for them to achieve as employees, as they must first feel included, they must feel safe to learn, and comfortable enough to contribute before they can even feel safe enough to challenge that status quo, even just a little bit. The respondents believe that their leaders' actions are not consistent with the communication. Again, we've heard this several times, not walking the talk. And respondents indicated that management does not demonstrate diversity, equity, and inclusion through their actions, providing support, again, as we've talked about, why the cognizant of bias is low. So Fars, what's so interesting is that the breweries want to do the right thing. Can you please provide us some insight into this?
Absolutely. And you're right. You know, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, most companies want to do the right thing, but they don't always know how to start. So diversity and inclusion, or D&I, that works in collaboration with HR to examine the inclusiveness of HR practices, but also collaborates with other functions to ensure that a D&I lens is being applied to everything the organization does. So for a D&I strategy to be effective, it needs to be actually embedded into the DNA of the entire organization. It cannot be seen as a standalone box to be checked. If it is, people will know it, right? So as we shared before, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice, and belonging, that's a feeling that can be nurtured through a purposefully created culture. When organizations embed diversity and inclusion into all aspects of their business, from employee touchpoints to customer service and community outreach, they tend to thrive. A sense of belonging can help drive that connectedness, which in turn helps build resilience and empathy and trust. And it can also reduce the risk of burnout, which we know negatively impacts engagement, retention, and even healthcare costs. So in our increasingly purpose-driven organization, or purpose-driven society, an organization's D&I strategy, that's a clear demonstration of the employee value proposition. And it's also a distinct differentiator for why people may choose to join, stay, or even leave your organization. 47% of organizations who responded to our workforce trend survey considered D&I to be a top priority, with another 42% stating that it's an emerging priority. So from honest, ethical leaders to fairness in workplace policies, to even equitable and compliant compensation and benefits programs, nearly all aspects of human resources programs can in some way impact how successful an organization is going to be in fostering their D&I. For your D&I strategy to resonate, it's critical to demonstrate a commitment to D&I through meaningful actions, which have to be founded on integrity and authenticity.
We're going to kind of breeze through the next couple of slides, but I think it's really important that, in most organizations, large or small, there really exists a culture of where each morning we wake up, we strap on our capes and show up for the day as a superhero. We push ourselves to be perfect, to meet all the deadlines, fulfill all the quotas, and exceed expectations. For many of us in leadership, we wear this ability to navigate chaos as a badge of honor. But you know what? There's a price to pay for that. There's a real opportunity for leaders and organizations to really recognize the importance of compassion when dealing with people. Because before we are workers or contributors or employees, at the end of the day, we're all human. Dolly, I'll get you kind of go on to the next slide.
Yeah, trying to be mindful of time here if we're skipping through a bit at the end here. So as we leave the session today, if you have time today or even later in the week, we'd love for you to take a few moments to consider these two questions and really think about them. Do you feel you have a respectful workplace? Do you feel you're respected at work? So for all you Wordle fans, resilience and respect in the workplace have more in common than just their 3 starting letters. Resilience in the workplace cannot be fostered without a solid foundation of just respect for one another. So we all have our own definition, but what we're referring to is a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. So we've got a number of things on the screen there. So inclusivity is a huge thing. So after hearing Far speak today, do we have a better understanding now of what it really means to be inclusive and how we can build that into the workplace and respect? Simple things like active listening, taking responsibility, doing what you say you will, and being part of a team. The list goes on. So after all we've talked about today around respect, diversity, belonging, and leadership, how will you take this information back and incorporate it into your day-to-day work environment? What ideas do you have? It's very important for you as a community to share your thoughts, your best practices, and your processes with everyone that's on the call. And from what we've been hearing, that's like an incredible thing that the CCBA is already doing, sharing your ideas in these working sessions. So that's fantastic. And that's how the information that everyone is learning moves from the knowledge aspect of change management, shifts into awareness, to the desire, and ultimately for the ability to make real change.
To be blunt, what used to be allowed, what we used to say at work or do at work is no longer acceptable. We've all said something offside from time to time and tried to make a joke without really kind of understanding the impacts of it. Even simple phrases like suck it up could set people off. Really, folks, it comes down to the perception and it's not about the intention. Lack of respect and rude behavior really leads to poor engagement and motivation. We all know that. We're all responsible and need to take steps to really build a more respectful workplace by thinking about how our behavior affects those around us and through leading by examples. Things can be as simple as being courteous and using manners, taking responsibility for your actions and helping another one out. Remember everyone, it's not about the intention, it's really about how it's perceived. Now this slide, there are many blurred boundaries in relationships in many small businesses, family businesses, friends as partners or as co-workers. And here's a great slide that we kind of developed that one that we recommend you post in your workplace. It could be on the wall, in the lunchroom, et cetera. And, really kind of take a moment to kind of read it over. But it's really about starting different things, different aspects, stopping different things, and then continuing with what's really working extremely well. Nearly all aspects of HR programs can impact truly how successful an organization will be in fostering an employee-centric culture and positive business outcomes through diversity and inclusion. For clients with existing HR policies and processes, we can certainly provide assessment and review policies and related governing documents, really through the lens of legislation compliance and ultimately best practices. This is particularly useful, we find, for organizations with limited in-house expertise or for corporations with smaller amount of Canadian employees with international head offices. They're all fee for services, but definitely can be shared resources through your collaborative network. We're really proud to be a partner with the CCBA, both through commercial and through group benefits in HR. And this slide just kind of shows you a little bit and explains a little bit about the partnership that we have with you. At the end of the day, folks, when employees feel that they can be their authentic selves, truly, with all the uniqueness and individuality that entails, they're more likely to do their best work and really ultimately want to stay with you. And when they see you managing this, like really managing it, well, it kind of goes without saying, you're leading them with authenticity. Your job is to work with and assist your employees to thrive. And I mean, really thrive, not just at work, but also at home and in their communities. It's time to get inclusive. Farz and Dolly, thanks so much for your comments today. I really appreciate them. There were so many large key takeaways. And thank you everyone for your time in joining us. To the Craft Brewery Association, thanks for trusting us to have this continued conversation with your association members. And, we'd certainly like to open the floor up if there are any questions or comments. Emily, Hillary?
Well, thank you so much, Gallagher team. And this session will be recorded and posted on our website. So if there was someone from your team that you wanted to be able to watch it, it will be accessible for you there so that you can share it with others on your team. I'll give a couple minutes for the chat. If anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to send those along afterwards as well. I know sometimes it's a little intimidating to ask them while the session's going. And I'll pass things over to Emily just to wrap up and share some of the next steps of our committee.
Thanks so much, Hillary, and thank you so much to the team from Gallagher. Really appreciate all of what I learned today. One of the things that I've learned being involved in this work over the past couple of years since this committee was formed is that every time we talk about this, I learn something new. And so the key is we just have to keep talking about this because we can learn from each other. We can learn from experts like you, and there aren't any stupid questions here either. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat while we have these great experts here on the call. So in terms of what the committee is working on right now, we have finished the benchmarking survey. We have digested the results and presented them out into the world. And we are looking carefully at what the right next steps are for us. Certainly, we will be hosting more opportunities like this on Third Thursdays and on other times where we ask experts to come in and talk to us about these things. But we also hope to be hosting more conversations internally within the industry as well, so that we can learn from each other. And we're working on some mechanisms to set that up and grow that within the industry. We're also looking for resources. So rather than, I mentioned earlier that we do operate on a somewhat limited budget. so far. We hope that will change, but we don't have a lot of capacity to create new resources. But what I think we can do a really good job of nationally is connecting people to resources that already exist, because there are tons. There are tons provincially, there are tons from other industries. And I know we've all come across things that have been very useful to us in our own journeys. And so we are hoping to be kind of the aggregator of some of the best resources that we can share with people. I just saw something pop up from Christine, diversity is a fact. That's a great quote. Thank you, Christine. Definitely something I noticed too. The difference between diversity is a quote and inclusivity is a choice, and then belonging is a feeling. That's beautiful and a really great way to think about it. So anyway, sorry, I digress. The other thing that, so we do want to amalgamate resources and make them available. We do want to host more conversations within the industry as well. And we do want to hear from you about your ideas about what we can work on next and how we can best serve the industry. I am really looking at this committee's role as being one of hosting, of connecting, and of building capacity within the industry to take on this change, because it happens at multiple levels at the same time. It happens within us as individuals, it happens within our breweries, and then it happens collectively in the industry. And that's going on simultaneously. It's not like this is not a linear process, and it's also not it's not necessarily a clear and clean process either. It is messy, it is hard. And I really appreciate how you touched on that, Dean, in terms of leadership and the type of leadership that's required to make this change. So I hope that we can continue to provide opportunities and resources that inspire people to take the next smallest step on this pathway of change. And in saying that, the next smallest step might be for you today to go to the CCBA website and to have a look. Hillary has created a beautiful new page, which she's going to type into the chat here, where all of our DEI work and resources are going to live from here on in. So the link is in the chat, and that is where the recording from the survey results seminar last week is available, as well as the document with the key takeaways from the survey. Do we have any questions for the team, Hillary, in the chat, or is it time to wrap everything up?
Just lots of appreciation for the insights shared today. So yeah, thanks again. That was a really great session, and I appreciate everyone's attention today joining us. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Emily.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.